thanks to the power of the music that touches our hearts today, that evokes images of dry bones coming to life. This powerful image from Ezekiel, where Ezekiel is told to blow across the valley of the dry bones and to allow that which has died to become alive. The powerful image of God, Jehovah, Yahweh, Elohim coming on the clouds, which is from the scripture reading today. That no matter what we go through, no matter how hard it gets, no matter how chaotic as nations rise against nations, as famines erupt, as people die in natural disasters, and we fear that it may be the end, when all is said and done. I caught the last two words of the Spanish, el gran gloria. Was that it? La gran gloria. It's the glory. The glory is the final word. The glory is what is final. The victory is won. I don't typically preach from apocalyptic passages. Sometimes they're a little scary, the words, some of the imagery. But they come out of hard times. They come out of times when people just think this is it. People think this is the end. People think that there is no more. And you know, when you start looking at the hurricanes that have been coming across the Caribbean, not just individual hurricanes, but families of hurricanes. I mean, we're talking about Harvey and Irma and their children, Jose and Maria and Norma. I mean, they're coming in families. And due to global warming, they're carrying more moisture than they've ever carried before. And due to rising sea levels, the sea surges are higher than they were before. I was talking to Lewis, and he has a place in Naples, Florida. And he was saying the hurricane sucked all the water out of his swimming pool, but there's water all around his house. The only place that doesn't have water is his swimming pool. And then you combine that with the political catastrophes that have been unleashed. The rescinding of DACA, these open white supremacist rallies happening all over the place with the apparent full blessing of the administration. You begin to get just a glimmer of the kinds of situations that the gospel was written in. You know, the gospel was written right after Jerusalem had been destroyed. The Romans came in and flattened Jerusalem, burned it to the ground, and then from there they began moving across the countryside to the villages, burning the villages. People thought, this is it. We're done. And out of that time of desperation, the stories of Jesus, the crucified and risen one, began to get written down. In the Gospel of Mark first, and in the Gospel of Matthew and Luke and John, and in the letters of Paul and the Revelation. The Revelation is a book that most of us shy away from, with its 7-headed beasts and its 10-headed dragons. And Revelation basically comes from the Greek word apocalypse. The apocalypse, the revelation about the end times. And when all is said and done, the glory of God continues to shine through. Now, I think this hope that we're looking for is dug deep. It's not a hope on the surface, because the kind of hopes we have on the surface can get blown away just like that. But this morning I want to look particularly at a couple of passages Number one, the desolating sacrilege. Now there's a phrase for you. The desolating sacrilege. In other words, we're not just talking about bad government here. We're not just talking about storms. We're talking about something that has begun to disrupt the natural order, something that has begun to violate the sacredness of human life and God's creation, the desolating sacrilege. But then I want to look at the human one. That's probably the best translation of this term, the Son of Man. Jesus doesn't call himself the Son of God. The gospel writers call him the Son of God, particularly after the resurrection. But Jesus refers to himself as the human one. The human one who is everything different than the desolating sacrilege. And the faith assertion that is made by the writer of the Gospel of Matthew and the other gospel writers, that it is the human one, humble, apparently not powerful, who is victorious over the desolating sacrilege, which looks at times like it has all the power. But in faith, we understand where the power actually lies. So I want to start with the desolating sacrilege. I mean, you know, hurricanes come in this time of year. That's something that we understand, but we're really looking at a full-scale assault on the planet Earth. It's more than the storms, which are more powerful than they used to be. And there's a scientific reason why they're more powerful, because of the gases from the burning of fossil fuels, the burning of, from car engines, from burning of coal and all these fossil fuels, the greenhouse gases that linger, that have accumulated, that are in greater quantities now in the earth, they trap the heat of the sun as it comes and tries to reflect back out. And the earth is slowly warming, about 1 degree in the last century. And that doesn't seem like a lot, except that when you think that the ice age was only 5 to 9 degrees colder than what we're at now. So it doesn't take a whole lot of degrees of temperature to alter the nature of the environment. Now, there are predictions in the next century that the earth will warm anywhere from 2.5 to 10 degrees. So now, if you're looking from ice age to where we're at, where does that take us if we go up another 10 degrees? What's life like for our children? What's life like for our grandchildren? What's life like for us right now? And then you combine that with the political catastrophe that is unfolding. Now, things have been bad all along. This country is founded on violence. There's nothing new about any of this, but, things can get worse. And some of what we're experiencing now has led to a level of fear among a lot of folks. And, what are you feeling? How does this all impact you? It's not like because of these kinds of things are unleashing around us that we get a break from the other things that are going on. The pressure of a commute to get to work, the concerns that we may have around illness, the surgeries we may face, the grief that we have for loved ones that have passed. None of this lessens as we begin to get the added pressures of the desolating sacrilege. So what does this word mean? I want to unpack this a little bit. The desolating sacrilege combines desolation, destruction. We're seeing destruction. We're seeing destruction of the environment. We're seeing destruction of people's lives. We're seeing destruction of the social fabric. Desolation. But a desolating sacrilege takes it a step deeper. A sacrilege is the violation of that which is sacred. So the sacred bond between God and humankind, the sacred bond between God and the creation, the sacred bond of love that we have between one another. There's a violation of this basic principle of love that rules the universe. The desolating sacrilege. Now, Louis Pasteur was a great microbiologist, and he did an experiment one time about where he put a bird in an environment that became increasingly toxic. He closed it off, and little by little, the air in this little containment that the bird was in was getting increasingly toxic. And the bird began to get a little despondent, move a lot less. Over time, pretty lethargic. And then Pasteur took another bird and put it in that environment, and the bird died immediately. And what he noted by that is that there is an adaptation that takes place, that birds and humans adapt to environments, and that which is toxic, we begin to get accustomed to. We begin to get used to, and we may get a little more lethargic. We may get a little less engaged and strong, but we build up an immunity. And I just wonder sometimes if we're building up immunity to desolating sacrilege. You know, that as we see evil swirling around us, as we experience things that seem to just get worse, that if we don't begin to normalize that which should never be normalized. The Gospels take this on with the full clarity of theological language, because sometimes you can't describe this stuff in political terms alone. You can't describe this stuff in terms of just what's happening, but there's a deeper reality, a theological reality, that is we need to tap into. A lot of what the Gospels are writing about is the destruction, the desolating sacrilege of the 1st and 2nd centuries under the Roman rule. And it was a brutal regime. And when all was said and done, it was not the end for them, but it was the beginning of the birth pangs of the collapse of the Roman Empire. And when the Roman Empire collapsed, there was, of course, a lot of discussion about why it happened and all that. And St. Augustine wrote a very powerful analysis called The City of God, a book called The City of God, which looked from a theological point of view at the collapse of the Roman Empire. And one of the phrases he used, he talked a lot about how the empire had been built on violence, that its eventual violent demise was not different from the foundation on which it was founded. And one of the terms he talked about was an empire that needed someone to fear in order to have someone to conquer. That more and more a guiding and foundational principle of the empire was always having to have someone to fear in order for them to have someone to conquer. And as one reads about this kind of thing around the Roman Empire, one might think that maybe there are some similarities with the American Empire. That maybe this drive that our country seems to have, always needing an enemy, always needing someone to fear, externally or internally, in order that there might be someone to conquer. The good news is that the desolating sacrilege is not the only game in town. And this is important to remember because it seems to get most of the news coverage. In the midst of all that they're dealing with, Matthew also wants us to be very clear about the role of the human one. The Son of Man, or the translation we're using, the human one, is the exact opposite of the desolating sacrilege. The desolating sacrilege likes to call itself God, likes to make itself God. And it may be that the actual occasion in Matthew was when the Emperor Caligula tried to put a statue in the Roman temple, in the Jerusalem temple. In Luke's gospel, it's more the armies, the Roman armies surrounding Jerusalem. They have different images that they use. But the human one does not take on the grandiose title. The human one does not have the credentials that the empire values. The human one does not make the kinds of grandiose promises about life in this material world that the desolating sacrilege makes. As a matter of fact, the human one is quite clear that life's rocky and it's going to get rockier. Life is tough in the empire and it's going to continue to get tough. That there are wars and rumors of wars, and these are but the birth pangs. That there is going to be a temptation for us to let go of the love that we have because of the tension that we're up against. And this is certainly something that we experience. To even have faith community is to battle with the desolating sacrilege even while we're in here. Because everything that we're encountering in the world that we live in are things that we carry with us and incorporate with us in some way. But the human one invites us to live in a completely different way. The incarnation of love, forgiveness, compassion, not hiding from but confronting the injustice in society, even to the point of death. The empire's response to the human one, of course, is crucifixion. But even crucifixion is not the end. The human one is the path to victory. No matter what we may be feeling, our tendency a lot of times is to try to go with the promises of the empire, even in the midst of the catastrophe. You know, I think of the American Red Cross, for example, which has become the kind of poster child for charity. I mean, if storms come, you immediately give to the American Red Cross. The American Red Cross, which was chartered by Congress, gets about 70% of what you give somewhere near the disaster area. Administrative costs at least 25%. Administrative costs to other local agencies, 10 and 11%. I was trying to look online for the salary of the CEO. They're keeping that real well hidden because I couldn't find it online. You Google CEO American Red Cross and you will not find it. At least I didn't. Some of you may be more savvy than I. But it seems like, well, in the over 1 million. And it was an interesting article this week that a lot of church groups are making much more effective responses to the hurricane than the Red Cross has. The United Methodist Committee on Relief, for example, has been one of the most effective on the ground, case study approach, really working with people and helping get access to the kinds of long-term care that they need, rather than just the cot. Not that the cot's not important in the moment. But it's not always the grandiose that contains the truth. It's not always that which glistens that contains the most power. You know, I was out at Yankee Stadium not too long ago, and I remarked to Lisa, I said, wow, these people know how to do worship. I mean, they know how to worship at Yankee Stadium. They do. It is down to a science. There is something that happens before the game. There's something that happens in the first inning. There's something that happens in the second inning. There's something that happens in the third inning. It's all, you know, the music and the different things and the pictures and the seventh inning stretch and everything. Man, they know how to worship. But that doesn't mean that the substance of what is being worshiped is life-giving in the long term. And I'm not throwing any shade at the Yankees here just because that's not my team. Because it's the same in every stadium. It's the same in every stadium. I mean, that people are talking about boycotting the NFL because of Kaepernick. Man, people should have been boycotting the NFL a long time ago. For the, you know, just what it is. For the injury. I mean, during their 20s, football stars are the American gladiators. They are the heroes. They get anything they want in the empire. But check out what's going on with them in their 40s and 50s. Check out the kind of pain that they're dealing with once they're lost and forgotten. Just because the empire can put on a show does not mean that there's any substance to it, does not mean that it's life-giving, does not mean that it will lead us through the storms of life that we're dealing with. And sometimes it's in the most desperate situations, in that which is the most humble, that which seems the least likely to succeed. And I think about a story that I read from a friend of mine's niece who lives in Tortola in the British Virgin Islands. And you know, some of those islands, Barbuda was completely destroyed. 95% of the buildings destroyed. No water, no power. Not one person living on that island right now. Tortola was also hit very hard. But her niece writes this. I won't post pictures of the devastation because most of the world may have already seen. What I hope to project is what the world may not see, the fight of our people. Extraordinary people who get up and relive part of the nightmare every day but find a way to go on. Each day gets better. Each day we are made stronger. I've had conversations with my 4-year-old, which I never thought I would or wish that any parent would ever have with a child. She carries a soul-crushing sadness, but is still filled with the joy of innocence, if not wisdom. Who we are is best seen in times of adversity, and the people of the British Virgin Islands are beautiful. We are not built to break. Jesus comes as the human one. Jesus comes among us. Jesus comes among those who are struggling the greatest. We talk in Growing in Faith 101 about the way that the first Gospel of Mark talks about God in the wilderness, that in the situations where people are struggling, God is there. In places where devastation has occurred, God is there. The thing I think that's so important in our faith is that the human one is the path to victory. And this is a statement that we can only make in faith. I'm no ways tired, not because of what all I've been through, but because I don't believe God has brought me this far to leave me. Because of what I've experienced in my life, because of the times that I've been most down, whether it was around physical illness, whether it was around emotional situations, that the presence of God is available to us. And when we get through the things that block us, when we get through the sense that we got it all under control, when we get to that place where we don't have anywhere else to turn, we experience the power and the presence of God like we have never experienced it before. When all is said and done, when the smoke clears, after the suffering of those days, after the sun is darkened, the stars have fallen from the heaven, then the human one appears, coming on the clouds with power and great glory. This is our faith. Amen. Oh, merciful God, we come to you with what we're dealing with. All the fears, all that overwhelms us, all that has hurt us, all the resentment, all that we are carrying, God, we bring before you. Because we believe, and we have experienced, and we continue to experience, that we are not forgotten. That you, O God, know our name. That you are with us and leading us to victory, leading us to healing, leading us to transformation, leading us to love. And for this, God, we are profoundly grateful. In the name of the human one, we pray.